What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the ARC Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon. If you're new tuning in, thank you for joining. This is the Athletes Resilience Center podcast, where we talk all things mental performance in sports. We have an awesome episode for you this week. We have on special guest Trevor Tellin. Trevor is a mental performance coach that works specifically with golfers and brings a unique experience from his background in basketball. We go through Trevor's journey and how his first love, basketball, led him to become a mental performance coach. We go through his journey in basketball, playing in college, and then ultimately stopping playing and getting into his next passion of mental performance coaching. We go into the reasons why Trevor became a mental performance coach. We go through Trevor's unique work working under Trevor Moawad, who was a very highly respected mental performance coach in this space before passing, and is most famous for his works with athletes like Russell Wilson and coming out with books such as It Takes What It Takes and Getting to Neutral. We also go into Trevor's experiences with performance coaching with business executives and how he brings that to the table when he works with his current athletes. We go into some of the best mental performance practices that Trevor utilizes with his golfers and how they can improve their game with some of the things that they do go over in their sessions. And we go over so much more regarding mental performance in sports. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thank you for taking the time tonight to chat with me and go over all things mental performance in sports, man. I'm excited to have you on here. How are we doing?
I'm doing great, Brandon. I appreciate the invite. I appreciate the time. I feel like we're gonna cook up some good ideas, some good thoughts, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too. I'm thrilled to have you on. You know, I really enjoy watching your social media content and following you from there. It's kind of how we got to connect. So this is awesome. And just like every episode, I will put the ball back in your court, and I'll kind of let you go through your journey on how you got to where you are today.
Let's see. I will try to condense this, frankly, because we don't need to go through the whole story here, but the main parts of it. So basketball was my sport growing up throughout, middle school, high school. This was the passion. This was the thing. When I was just about ready to graduate high school, I was going through this decision of, or the recruiting process, you could say, and trying to figure out where I want to go. And Trevor was very much of the thinking that I had to go to this type of school. Otherwise, it didn't make any sense. And when those opportunities didn't really pop up, I decided actually I wasn't going to play anymore. So I went to school for a year at Texas State University, tried to do a year of regular undergraduate, and realized within a handful of months that was a terrible mistake. And I missed basketball so much, and I had to get back to it. Moved then up to Iowa, funny enough. I know you mentioned family in Kansas, but up to Iowa. Spent 2 years at a junior college in Mason City, Iowa. Learned a ton. Was really fun. And then actually from there, went and finished up my undergrad at a school in Arizona called Benedictine University. While I was at Benedictine, basketball took an absolute turn for the worst, frankly. I got there, was excited, was eager, but never connected with the team. Really that great. Never felt at home. Didn't quite see eye to eye with the coach on a few items. And eventually, about 8 games into the season, I think it was, I pulled the plug and I quit. And it was I don't know if gut wrenching is too extreme of a term, but it felt that way. It's like, here's, and I know I've heard y'all talk about this before, like, this is my entire identity. I'm a basketball player. What else do I do? And now that I don't have that, again, I'm, it's like Ricky Bobby. I don't know what to do with my hands. Like, where do I put my time?
Right.
So funny enough, luckily enough, I suppose, I was already interested in psychology. That was the route I was planning on going, go to graduate school, be a therapist, work in the traditional field. And due to this sports experience, I took a step back one day and I discovered sports psychology. I'd never known this existed previously. And I said, well, this is pretty great. Combines psychology, combines sports, 2 things I really love. And maybe it would help me understand a little bit more about my own journey, because I had recognized by that point my mental game really was getting in the way. I was incredibly fortunate to get into contact with a gentleman named Sean Kelly Quinn out in the Scottsdale, Arizona area. And he worked alongside a gentleman named Trevor Moawad, who was a world-renowned mental performance coach.
Love Trevor Moawad. That's one of the reasons the podcast started, truthfully. Read both of his books, Getting to Neutral and then It Takes What It Takes. So big fan over here.
Okay, brilliant. Well, likewise, that is a shared mutual appreciation of Trevor. It was incredible. I got the chance to work out there in their office for about 6 to 8 months or so while I was wrapping up my undergraduate, worked with another gentleman who was down from Canada, going through graduate school already, and got to see from the inside what it's like to really run, a sports psychology business. Now, granted, Trevor Moawad worked with some pretty remarkable talent at that point in time, but it was great to see, okay, what does somebody who's pretty well respected in this field, what do they do with excellent teams like, Nick Saban in Alabama or Georgia or Florida State or whoever it is, and got a really good inside picture on, just the day in and day out routine. Fell in love with it even more. From that opportunity, they kind of directed me. Sean Kelly Quinn, the gentleman I mentioned previously, he had gone to school in Northern California, recommended the university, found my way there, spent 6 or 7 years in Northern California, got the master's, loved it, and then actually took a little bit of a turn and stopped working with athletes. I joined a luxury wellness company. It's based out of California. We had a property in Hawaii. So I went out there and was working primarily with executives, lawyers, business owners, surgeons, these sort of individuals. Very, very high performance, but just from different realms. And it was perhaps one of the most valuable experiences I've ever gotten. One, because the imposter syndrome was through the roof when I first sat down into some of those conversations. But I started to quickly realize these are normal people. They know a lot about some things, but they don't know a lot about this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here having this chat. So that was formative, really, really cool. I went and then opened up another property with that company in Southern California, and then made the move out to Philadelphia and stepped away, leaned a little bit back into the sports side of things, have now started, my own coaching and Inner Loop, which is a big project that I'm working on right now as well. So that's the long, short version of how we got here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for sharing all that with me.
Yeah.
Now, let's take it back to the beginning, right? You talked about you had this image for yourself of if I'm not going to play at this certain level, then it's not even worth me going to college and playing basketball, right? Did you have aspirations to play professionally? Was that like in your vision at that time? Were you like pro or bust, or were you kind of like D1 or bust, or what was the end goal for you at that time period?
Yeah. The ultimate goal was to play professionally, not in the States. That wouldn't have happened. I was aware enough of that, but at least, somewhere overseas, I thought that would be possible to some degree. But when it came to the college piece, that's really where it was. And of course, I'm thinking, I'm hot stuff. Why not? D1 or bust,
Of course.
right?
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember an opportunity where I toured a D2 school and they were interested, and I tried. No, I'm too good for that. And what a foolish mistake that was. But at the same time, I'm happy where I'm at now in life. So it also all, brought lessons and good insight with it.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear now from your perspective, right? Like during that time period of having that D1 or bust mentality, so my kind of expertise in the field that I love is baseball. That's kind of what I grew up playing. I played at a Division III school. I got to play a little bit of independent pro ball for a season over the COVID year, which was great. But, for me in high school at a certain time, it was the D1 or bust mindset for me. Like thinking about going to a Division III school. And I went to a school that was like 45 minutes away from where I grew up, had the best experience of my life. It was the best decision I could have ever made. But I remember looking back, let's say like my sophomore year, and I was like, I'm going D1. Like there's no way I'm going D3. You know what I mean? I guess what is the, philosophy or mindset that you kind of help people, shift or understand when they're going through a recruiting process like that? Because I know for me at that time, like, I guess I saw more baseball and I got to my junior and senior year and I kind of realized, okay, D1's a pretty big jump. And at this point in my career, I graduated high school at 5'8", 140 pounds. So not your typical Division I build, especially for a pitcher. So, I kind of came to grips with it where it's like, okay, this is a journey for some people, but it isn't the journey for me. And going to a school that's going to benefit me more actually may be better for the route that I want to get into, which is potentially playing professionally. Maybe going back and talking to yourself during that time period, what is the conversation that you would have? Because I'm sure obviously you have a much different perspective now, but what would that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And well, I don't know if any answer would have convinced me then, frankly.
Of course.
I think the biggest difference maker would be having an understanding that nothing's permanent, right? And just because you go one place 1 year, and we see this now more than ever, right? Like, you don't have to stay there. Why not? Just use it as the doorway. It's the door that's open. Take it. Great. Improve. Get better. Prove to these folks that you think should, desire you now, that you're worth it, and you never know where that'll lead. So having a little flexibility there, I think would have definitely been a message I would have loved to hear.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think in our world today, it's just I talked about this on one of the last interviews that we just had on the podcast where, it's really big for kids to post in their Instagram bio, like I am a ex commit to, whatever Division 1 college, and
Right.
they have the post with the edit and it's like, wow, that's really
Right.
cool, X,
Right.
Y, and
Right.
Z.
Right.
But what you see a lot of times is a lot of those guys kind of bounce back. So they'll start at a Division 1 level and then they come back to a junior college or come back to a Division 2 or Division 3 school, kind of like you mentioned. And there's nothing wrong with that because I think there's a different school
Sure.
for everyone. And now the landscape of collegiate sports has it so you can make those jumps and not lose eligibility and be able to kind of make
Sure.
decisions like that. Now, for yourself, right, you kind of mentioned you made that decision. You're like, man, this was not the right decision to just be a student and not try and play basketball. Do you remember like the specific moment where you're kind of looking at yourself like, what am I doing? I just need to go and grind for this.
Great question. Wow, if I had to think back, I will be honest. I think I've probably suppressed repressed a lot of
Yeah,
that
of
freshman
course.
year.
No, I get that.
But
Yeah.
to be frank, you know what I think it was when I was in kind of that fork in the road of, all right, do I go to one of these opportunities that I have that is, not matching up with my expectation, or do I go this
Right.
other route? What really pulled me towards the other route of not playing was friends. And I was like, well, shoot, I'll go with them. I'll have a great time. I know I'll enjoy that. Frankly, throughout that year, a few of those friends started to grind some gears pretty bad. And I think I started to have a realization of like, ooh, wait a minute. I think I was just trying to escape something and this doesn't really align. What do I really care about? It just creates that moment of reflection. And it's like, oh man, basketball. That has never made me feel quite like this.
Right.
And I think it was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I remember trying to, it wasn't immediate though, because I
Yeah.
even, to a little bit just to appease my dad, I was fine. I'll go try to walk on to the team or something like this. And I gave such a half-ass effort at that that I didn't need to be there in the first place. So it took a little time, got some of the thrills out, had the fun of freedom coming from being an athlete for the last however many years. Like you'd never had that much freedom. But yeah, at some point, I'm sure they just pissed me off a little too much. And I was like,
Yeah.
you know what? I think I made a mistake, frankly.
Right. No, I completely get that. And I can see it now. And I feel like you and I during that time period probably would have had a lot of similar conversations about stuff like that, where I'm sure there were periods when I was, looking to play collegiate baseball. And again, it was like, is this even worth it? Like maybe
Yeah.
it would be fun to be able to get these weekends back. And, you'll
Yeah.
have a spring break during college for baseball wise, or you'll have your winter breaks and not have to worry about anything. You could just kind of hang out. But at the end of the day, it's going back and finding what your true love was at that time, which is, basketball for you and
Absolutely.
baseball for me.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true. So true.
Yeah. Now, I'd love to dive into and nerd out a little bit with you on working with Trevor Moawad because
Absolutely.
truthfully, I'm not even kidding or just saying this. When I kind of had a weird route and journey into playing independent baseball. So I played collegiate baseball. I had a pretty decent career. And then I went to a bunch of independent pro ball tryouts. I knew
Sure.
the draft wasn't going to be an option. I'd gotten a little bit of interest, but nothing that was going to stick. I kind of came to terms with that and was like, all right, the independent pro route was going to kind of be the one that I kind of go down. I went to a bunch of tryouts, like more tryouts than I can count on. And there were so many teams that, after the tryout would come up to me and go, you have it, but our roster's full. We'll keep you on the roster. We'll keep your number and we'll give you a phone call. This one was the worst one. Was I went down in Illinois. There's this team and went to a tryout. It's like an open tryout. I throw the best that I've ever felt that day ever. Like just, woke up with that sense of I was free. It was kind of like, I've been to so many tryouts. This is nothing to lose. I'm just having fun out here. The best I've ever thrown. The coach comes up to me after he calls me out of everyone. He said, Brandon Zachary, please come to the coach's box or whatever. So I go in, I talk, and he said, we think you have what it takes to be on the team. Pack your stuff at home. We'll give you a call on Monday. Cause that was like their signing transaction day. And I was like, amazing. Went home, started to pack the bags. I'm ready to go. I joke with my co-host on here, Matt, all the time. They still haven't called. It's been a lot of Mondays since then, but no phone call ever came.
Damn, man, it's brutal.
That's the business. And I kind of understood that quick, but that was in 2019. And I was like, all right, you know what? I'm good. I'm done. I gave it my effort and, I can look back on that and be proud of the effort that I gave. So then COVID comes and I'm thrown in a men's league, and then out of nowhere, I am messaging this kid that I used to play in college with. like against. And he had signed with an independent team in North Jersey. And he was like, our coach is looking for arms and I vouched for you. And he said he remembers you from one of the tryouts and he'd love you to come up and throw a bullpen and try out for us again. And during that time period, when I was playing in that men's league, I was reading Trevor's book, It Takes What It Takes. And truthfully,
Hey.
mentally, I really think that helped me in that moment understand kind of one, the sacrifices I needed to make in order to kind of get there during that time. It was also COVID, so it was a little bit easier to, there wasn't much going on. So it was a little bit easier to make a lot of those sacrifices, but just the mindset shift going into that season was much different. I would say I'm playing with house money as if I'm at the casino, right? Like playing with house money. I'm not supposed to be here, but I'm here and I'm having a good time. And I stayed throughout that whole season, but Trevor's book really meant a lot to me during that time period. Then I got to read Getting to Neutral. And I think, obviously, I never met him, never had that experience, but obviously you worked underneath of him. And I'd love to hear your experiences with him because truthfully, his writing meant a lot to me during a time period that was a little bit, interesting and intriguing for me. So I'd love to hear your experiences with him.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's what's the right word for it? Fascinating to hear you say that because I think that's probably a common thread with a lot of, the impact that his writing had for a lot of people and his work had just at scale for a lot of folks. So that's just great to hear for one. B or two, what are the biggest? Okay. The first thing I realized, that man was busy. It was incredible. I had not seen somebody, I don't know if I'd ever seen somebody work that hard yet in a business sense. We used to joke that like, if he's not here, then he's coming here. And if he's not coming here, then he's leaving here. Like, when next team, next individual. And I found that really remarkable because even throughout that, when he was back in the office, like the man was in, he's a good vibe. He was a good mood, right? He was joking around. He was, educating, giving, good tips, good advice, etc. And just to be a fly on the wall, mostly was just a fly on the wall at that time. It was really, really cool to soak it in. And a few of the things that I probably saw during that time are still elements of what I do today. So for example, with my Instagram, the whole reason that I utilize clips of professional golfers and then add my commentary to it is because I saw Trevor Moawad do a very similar version of that. I used it with a member on his team, a gentleman named Jonathan Schultz, who I think is now with the Yankees organization. And we would sit down and just cut through game film. And we would find all the different clips that represented these players, demonstrating confidence or focus or whatever it is. We'd stitch all those together. And then when Trevor was there working with the teams, we'd whip out his iPad and he'd show them that, kind of confidence tape, if you will, that highlight reel. And they spoke about how much that landed and how well that worked. And it's like, shit, don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, you know what I mean? Keep doing this. So things like that were super interesting to see. The way he was able to simplify as well, right? He can take, psychology, performance psychology, it can get abstract. It can get complicated. It gets a little wordy and jargony at times. And I personally feel like I see this in the field. You have different styles where some folks they rep that side of things. Like they use the big words and maybe that works. I personally don't love that style. I like Trevor's where it's like, man, I can take this, complex concept, but I can boil it down to something as easy as like, let's just get to neutral, right? Or like, what's the most important thing in front of us right now? And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. So how to really speak, how to kind of package messages, how to run the business side of it as well a little bit, all was able to capture in that time.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I loved about kind of what he spoke about, what he preached about the ideology of getting to neutral is like, when you're growing up and you play these sports and you get down on yourself, right? I think the first thing that a lot of parents, a lot of people, a lot of coaches would say is like, you just got to be positive. You got to have a positive mindset about this. And it's like, well, let's be real here. In this moment, I'm not positive and I can't just flip this switch to make me positive, right? Where this idea of neutral thinking, I think really hit for me because it was like, it's not about being positive. It's about, okay, this happened. What can I learn from it in the moment? And then what can I get better? And boom, like we can make adjustments based off of that. Where if you're positive, also sometimes, you can miss the things that maybe we need to improve on or what we can learn from because it's like, oh, I'm just going to be positive about it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. Where this idea of neutral thinking is like, let's analyze what happened so it doesn't happen again and we can get better and improve, which to me made a lot of sense. And I think, that resonated with me and I've never heard it spoken the way I guess he kind of spoke about it. But I guess when you're getting into that field and you're learning under him, right? And you kind of mentioned some of the things that you like took away from him some of the things that you learned from him. Like in that sense, when he's talking about neutral, I think that's a very unique and individualized thing that he kind of, I guess, established and talked about.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess what are your takeaways from that ideology of like getting to neutral, and how do you implement it in the work that you do today? Because I think that was a concept that really resonated with me, and I'd love to hear kind of what it meant for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it resonated with myself as well, and I think one of the main reasons it did, so before I got into performance psychology and sports psychology specifically, I had a really big kind of infatuation with Eastern thought growing up. So a little bit in high school, but definitely when I got in college, Zen and different forms of Buddhism and just different sort of Eastern philosophies I found very interesting and just new ways of thinking. And within that, there's a concept referred to as the middle path. And it's basically this same idea that yes, there's this extreme over here, there might be this extreme over here, but I find my way into the middle and I, bring acceptance to both sides. So when I started hearing this idea of neutral thinking, it's like, oh, well, that, not everybody wants me to sit there and say, well, the Buddha said 2000 years, right? Like that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but
Yeah.
something as simple and as understandable of, all right, you know what drive is, you know what reverse is, like, well, we know what positive and we know what negative is. Like, let's explore this kind of third space that we don't really acknowledge much. And in that, I feel like, and I feel like I kind of heard this from yourself as well, like it brings acceptance to a moment that
Yeah.
otherwise maybe we fought with.
Right.
It brings acceptance to a mental skill that otherwise maybe we would have fought with of like, just be positive. And it just gets us back to the present. It gets us back to, okay, well, now what do I do? Great. Like, yes, that is what it is. And what do I do about it? And I don't know if there's, frankly, I mean, we could talk sport, we could just talk life. I don't personally know if there's like a more valuable skill than that, right? Because we're constantly going to run into situations that don't fit what were our expectations. And the more we can accept them, the more we can roll with them. Personally, anecdotally, I found good things happen with that.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Now,
yeah, when it comes to athletes, then it's just, it's sharing those same principles in a sense. Actually, got off a call right before this with a young man, a basketball player who we were talking about this idea. And it lights me up when people like when athletes grab it. And he had a perfect example of coaches playing me in a position I'm not really used to and I'm not real happy about it. And it now gives me an opportunity to, patch up some of my gaps and work on skills that maybe I don't typically do. And I was like elated when he said that. But
yeah.
I think that right, great. We can apply it in so many different ways and it keeps us focused, productive, and empowered to some degree.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love hearing that. And again, I could nerd out all day about Trevor Moawad because
Yeah.
I holds a special place in my heart for, reading his writings and following him on social
Yeah.
media and kind of getting into that. So no, I appreciate you diving into that. And then you kind of talked about your experiences going into a different sector, working with business executives. And like you said, you kind of felt a little bit like imposter syndrome-esque, a little bit underqualified, if you know what I'm saying, not
Yeah.
anything insulting, but just,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's kind
Yeah.
of how you felt. I'd love to hear how you kind of overcame that in that moment, because I'm sure, I've done it in coaching as well. When you're working with an athlete where you're like, wow, his skill level or what he's achieved is higher than anything that I've ever achieved. Like, how can I teach him anything? Like, how were you able to overcome that and, ultimately, you know, have success in your job?
Yeah. Yeah. No, great question. Well, what's the right way of framing this response? The simple matter of fact is like just doing it.
Yeah.
You just got to do it.
Yeah.
Swear to God, this is not a lie. The first session I remember doing live, I literally sweat that entire session like I was on the basketball court. I distinctly remember mid-session wiping my forehead, being like, "Oh my God, this guest is gonna think I have like something is wrong with me." And the next one, you sweat a little less. And the next one, you don't sweat at all. And it was a combination of just doing it, like getting out of the comfort zone because you're here. This is what it is. But B, the more I started to do it, the more I realized, oh, wait, these folks are experts in their path. They might not be experts, though, and they probably really aren't in what we're sitting here talking about. And as you recognize that more, and then, of course, I know it's not recommended to look always for external validation, but let's be real. When I have a client or two say, hey, I like that. This is good. Then, okay, great. It gives me confirmation. At least I'm on the right track. I can trust myself a little bit more. And then bit by bit, that confidence forms. And now I'm excited to go have those conversations because I feel like I can bring something beneficial to the table.
Yeah. And I think when you were going over your journey, you kind of brought up how impactful that situation was for you and having those experiences. I'd
Yeah.
love to hear kind of the overlap and then the differences between working with business executives and some high level performers in that space versus working with athletes.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's really interesting about it is there's not a lot of difference. The thing that changes is like the playing surface, right? They're not on the court. It's not a 4-quarter game. It's not an 18-hole round. It's a meeting that they're preparing for. It's a career transition. It's something along these lines. So frankly, what I really leveraged was a lot of the same techniques from sports psychology. And for a lot of these folks, that was interesting and that was intriguing because some of them may have been ex-athletes, but also it's just a slightly different way of thinking about it. It's a little more practical, it's a little more applied, it's a little more matter of fact, but at the same time, we're raising awareness, we're learning, and we feel like we're developing through it. So it wasn't a huge difference at all, to be quite frank. And also what I found is folks in the business world, I think they like athletes. Like, well, I mean, a lot of people look up to athletes, right? It's like, oh, that's cool. That's impressive. So if I can bring bits and pieces to the conversation of, well, and I'm just using this as an example, but LeBron James does this, or, whoever does this, Rory McIlroy. But you pull in these examples, they buy in a little bit that way, and now
Right.
we're all on the page.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I feel like being a high level performer, truthfully, whether it's in sports or business, there probably are a lot of overlaps. Now, were there any differences that you kind of faced between the two different populations? Because I'm sure as much as there is similarities, I'm sure there has to be some differences between the two.
Yeah, certainly. In the sense that, some techniques and tools. Well, let me say it this way first. The way that I do a lot of my work is I think of it like kind of two-tiered in a sense, right? Where, you could look at this whichever way you want, but the foundational level is bigger picture. It's more perspective based. It's more awareness. It's okay. How do I look at and relate to life? That conversation to me, whether I'm working with either population, is always going to be there. Depending on age and maturity, it's going to show up slightly different, but nonetheless, that's always there. But what would change is kind of that second layer of great, here's the big picture, but what am I going to do today? And what am I going to do today in a sports context is typically much more pointed to the situations, to, what the game includes or doesn't include. Typically, it's a little more straightforward, even frankly, when you're then translating it to like, well, I have a 12-hour day. Perfect example of this is a pre-performance routine. I would talk with obviously athletes a lot about, all right, great. You want to be in a particular state for a performance? Let's first identify that state and then let's reverse engineer here and help us understand what'll get us there. So when it came then to this other sort of clientele, if you will, I turned that into something I refer to as a launch list. Okay, the start of your day is like a performance, right? Your day is going to be all these different challenges and hoops and hurdles and so forth. What state do you want to be in, at least at the start of the day? Great, we understand that. Well, let's reverse engineer now. How can we use, the hour or so in our morning to start preparing ourselves, priming ourselves to meet that performance? Now, again, it's a 12-hour day, so that means we're going to need to take pit stops in between and we're going to need to layer in a little bit. But, just kind of shifting and repackaging and reorganizing made things work. But that's by far the biggest hurdle, kind of
Yeah,
biggest challenge.
that makes a lot of sense. And then,
Yeah.
making that transition back into sports as you did. I know a lot of the content that you put out on social media and looking at your website is golf related and working with golf
Yes, indeed.
athletes. And I know you said you were working with a basketball athlete, but it seems like a lot of your focus has been on golf. Now, why did you make the decision to kind of shift towards focusing on golf a little bit versus kind of I guess, what you're comfortable with in basketball?
Yeah. Yeah. No, great question. So the seed was planted, if you will, when I left Hawaii and came back to Southern California. The property that I was working at there has a private golf course, and I mean, just immaculate golf course. But through that, we had created some new programming where I got to start working with folks who were coming out there for golf. So we'd have performance psychology sessions and teach breathing. We'd dive into heart rate variability all around, golf-based situations. And simultaneously just had some colleagues. I was living in the Palm Springs area, so there is a lot of golf courses out there. So I just started golfing. And I'd done it when I was a kid a little bit, but, not a big interest. And that in just combination with when I stopped playing basketball, frankly, I love to watch it. I don't love to play it as much
Yeah.
anymore. It just
Yeah.
doesn't, light the same kind of spark as it once did. But golf now kind of created a new spark where, wow, this is very mentally challenging, frankly, sucks. So it's fun to improve and
Right.
try to actually get better at things. And then that layered with the fact that not long after, somewhere within that mix, I worked for IMG Academy for a little
Yep.
bit with their IMG Academy Plus. So they opened a remote based kind of arm of things where they did mental performance and nutrition coaching. And I worked with, I don't know, my case, I probably had somewhere between 50 and 70 athletes at one time, all a variety of sports. And it really dawned on me that, while a lot of sports seem to be athlete based, whether or not they're really into mental skills. Almost every time I talked with a golfer, they got it. They bought in. They were about it, right? They acknowledged, yeah, golf is incredibly mental and I need to work on this. And personally, just as a business professional, it's like, I'm not a dentist. I hate pulling teeth. I'm not a salesman. I want to go to the people that, are about this.
Of
So it was
course.
just the natural progression. I was finding interest. They liked it. And why not kind of marry the two together?
We want to take a quick second to let you know that today's podcast is brought to you by the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton, New Jersey. Whether it's picking up a snack between games or picking up a party tray for the big game, the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton has you covered. For all of your pretzel needs, make sure you stop by the Philly Pretzel Factory of Marlton, located on North Maple Ave. Let them know that the ARC podcast sent you. Now back to the episode. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. And no, I mean I picked up golf a little bit more over the last 2 years, and I'm in the same
Uh-huh.
boat as you. I'm not very good, but getting better slowly, and it's a blast though. I love going out there with my friends and playing. So golf is
Totally.
great. But you just brought it up a little bit ago. You're working with a basketball athlete and then this golf sphere, and you're probably working with athletes of all different sports. Now, how do you as the coach kind of transition when you're working with a golfer, working with a basketball
Yeah.
player, baseball player, football player? Like, how do you transition as the coach?
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm pretty what's the right word for this? Dialed in, frankly, with now who I do work with. So it is 95% golfers. And
Yeah.
then frankly,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
only folks I tend to make an exception for are folks that I know. So I'd worked with this basketball player in the past. There's a water polo player here in kind of the Philadelphia
Yeah.
area that
Cool.
I know and know their family. So, I'll make an exception there. So if folks will reach out to me, then I'll embrace that. But
Right.
otherwise, I tend to focus in on a golf and more than anything, that is to your point, so that I can get as knowledgeable as possible about this one area, because you're absolutely right. And I ran into this with IMG where I worked with a rower one time.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about rowing
Right.
or a
Right.
pole vaulter. And it's like, well, I'm the slowest person. Like, I didn't do tracks. This is not me. So I learned very quickly there that, while the sports were interesting and I'd love to learn from the athletes that I work with, I'm not doing them the best service possible. There's somebody else out there who obsesses over pole vault like I do, my thing. And
Yeah.
I'd rather have that person, work with them so they get the most out of it. So I've narrowed and just say no a little bit more.
Now, I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I'd love to hear also, like, with all of your experiences through sport, through your resilience in sport, through the decisions that you made that you said you regretted, and then ultimately probably ended up being the best thing for you and led to the career that you're in today. Like, how important are those experiences for you now when you're coaching someone who might be in the same boat or going over some of the same mental hurdles that you had? Because I'm sure that adds like a different layer than just, I know how to address this, but it's like I've actually been there and done that myself. Like, how important is
Yeah.
that you have that layer under your belt?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it is really important. Also think it can be, I don't know if dangerous is too extreme of a word, but I think it can also have a negative impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect example of this is working with basketball players. Due to my own story and history with basketball, when I work with an athlete who is going through something relatively similar, on one hand, I feel like, I have a good perspective here. Maybe I can offer a little reasoning. At the same time, I can see myself in them. And if I'm not careful about it, I can get on their team, take off the sports psych hat and just be fan of athlete and be like, oh no, screw it, dude. Screw that coach. You need to go do this. Trust yourself.
Right.
You're the most, it's easy to also slip into that. So I try to stay very mindful, pull the pieces from it and try not to project my own stuff too much onto others. So helpful, but also got to be careful.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And now, are you working with athletes just remote, or are you working with people in person as well?
Yeah. Predominantly remote. For the most part, if folks are local to the Philadelphia area, then heck yeah. I mean, it is always nice to be able to watch an athlete in person, right? You just see the body language, you see the instant reactions. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is our memories are good, but they're not that great, right? So if an athlete goes out and performs on a Tuesday and then we don't talk till the next Tuesday, there's a lot of things that have happened. And it's like, I know I sometimes forget what I had like for breakfast 2 days ago.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do I expect an athlete to remember all of that? So the in-person is nice, but at the same time, sometimes, remote is just what's necessary because where folks live or just what's most accessible.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I'd love to hear because I think you bring up a good point. And I think even with people that are doing like physical lessons or sessions with
Oh,
coaches,
sure.
when you're talking about like in my world, a pitching lesson, right? Like if a kid throws a bullpen today and then I don't see him until next week, right? Like you just said, there could be something he feels that he might not even remember. It's like, man, my bullpen felt great last week. It's like, okay, well, what worked? What felt great? And he's like,
Yeah.
you know what? I don't really remember. And it's like, oh, well, great. But in your context that you were just talking about, like remote or, seeing someone in person, and if they have a session where they go out on the golf course, let's say, and they feel great or they don't feel great, they have some sort of mental block, and then you meet with them the next session, they're like, you know what? Kind of forget what that was about or what happened or what the scenario was. Are there any kind of methods that you try to put in place in order for them to maybe reflect in that moment or keep track of that or keep note of that? Or is that something that's not really, I guess, touched on?
No, it's a good question. It depends a little bit on what we could say severity perhaps of it is, right? Particularly in my first, because I get this a lot. I assume other folks get this a lot. Sometimes you sit down for a session and it's like, what do you want to talk about? Oh, I have nothing to talk about. It's like,
Right.
there's something to talk about here. We just got to get to it. So question asking is typically the go-to, right? Like, okay, you don't remember a whole lot. Just tell me what you do remember. Let's start there. They might tell me a situation or two. I might throw out oh, interesting. Let's dive into that one a little bit. How'd that happen? What led to that? What happened after that? And slowly but surely, you can tend to kind of jog folks' memory and, kind of start to bring that experience back up. If it's a case where that is still not working, typically what I'd probably have somebody do is, after you wrap up with practice today, after you wrap up with competition, pull out your phone, pull out your journal, jot down just a 2, 3, quick thoughts, quick ideas
Yes.
that you
Yeah.
want to bring to our next chat. And that way we'll have something to really work on and work off of and be more productive because I don't want to waste anybody's time. And
Right.
selfishly, I don't want to waste my own time.
Yeah.
So if we don't have good stuff to talk about, then what are we doing here to some degree?
Yeah, no, I love the idea of jotting like 2 or 3 things down at the end of, whatever session it is, because I think I could have utilized that a little bit better when I was playing. I think not that I left many things to chance, so to say, but like, you might feel good on a certain day and it's like, it is what it is. I just felt good. There wasn't much reflection going into it. Or today I felt bad and I don't really know why I felt bad, but I just didn't perform
Sure.
very well. Where maybe if there was a little bit more of a reflection piece in that moment, I might have
Yeah.
been able to identify some things. So I really like the kind of 2 to 3 takeaways, kind of make it concise and simple and
Yeah.
have some things that you can discuss and go over. So I appreciate that. That sounds cool. We're talking in this golfing world, right? And I think you do a really good job on social media of posting a lot of golfers and them talking about the way they think, the way that they approach the game, the way that they approach a shot after a bad shot, like all these different scenarios. Now that you're coaching in this field and you've coached a bunch of athletes, this might sound like a funny question, but how much of your coaching is coming from the past experiences that you've had with other athletes versus what you're kind of seeing on, like, not necessarily on social media, but from these professional athletes where they're kind of giving these nuggets? Because I do see on social
Yeah.
media you're posting a lot about a lot of these guys who are high peak performers and how they do it, and a lot of them have a lot of different ways and approaches they go about it. So how much of your coaching is, okay, here are the experiences that I've had with a lot of these other athletes, myself, this is the way that I coach, versus I'm going to take some of these things from some of these, high level performers on the golf
Yeah,
course?
a great, really good question. I'd say it's some version of a blend to some degree, right? And I would say that ratio of blend is probably different for every single conversation or every single individual. The foundation of it when I'm working with an individual is certainly my training, my education. What do I know from science? What do I know from research and so forth? That's realistically the foundation. Next layer up is probably personal experiences. My personal experiences is a really, really thin layer. I might throw it out there for a little, self-disclosure, just create a little more rapport, a little connection. Hey, look,
Yes.
I've been there type thing. Then would be the big chunk of, okay, here's what else I know has worked in past situations. I had this golfer before, very similar scenario. What do you think about this? Let's break it down. Or sometimes, if I know it'll make sense, I'll reference an athlete I've worked with from a different sport and say, this worked over here for this tennis athlete. Like, I don't know, could it work any way for you? Sometimes, we get the creative juices going. Where the professionals come in is frankly when I need to make a point or when I need to create more credibility or buy into what I'm talking about. So, example of this would be working with a golfer not long ago, and we were talking about how they spend their time in between shots. So great. Tee off. Now we got to walk, the hopefully 300 yards because you crushed your drive and to go find
Yeah.
your ball. And what do we do in between that time? And having this chat with an athlete and they're saying, it's so easy for me to start getting wrapped up in the game. All right, how many more strokes do I need to, get up, or how far am I down, or do I need to play aggressive, yada, yada. And we're talking about the idea of, well, that's actually a really good time to be like unfocused. Like mind wandering, research is showing us, is actually really healthy. So maybe this is the time we mind wander. Just pay attention to, nature, our playing partners, let's joke, whatever it is. And that's a perfect example of when I can bring in something from social media where, Neil Shipley, he does math problems in between his holes, or James Nicholas, who's very popular on social media, he does trivia questions. And that'll just be enough. Frankly, they care about what I say, but they care more about what a professional does. I'm cool with that. That's fine. So
Right.
I'm going to use that to my advantage. So I plant a seed. I then bring in something from the pros. This adds a little more oomph to it to a degree. And now they're bought in. Now we find what that looks like for them. And then,
Yeah.
boom, we're off to testing. It's a little bit of a blend. Depends on
Yeah.
the scenario.
No, I love that. That's awesome. And I do appreciate the content that you do put on social media, kind of analyzing that and bringing that to light, because it is cool to see how many different athletes have, different approaches and implement different
Yeah.
styles. It is really cool to see.
It is. And it goes to show, right, that there is no one size fits all in this space, right? We're all uniquely different. So that means how we strategize, how we relate, what we use is going to be. A Rory clip I posted today, he was going off about optimism and how
Yes.
important that is, right? And it's
Right.
like, oh, fascinating. I haven't really heard other people say it in exactly that same way. So it's just fascinating to get the perspectives.
Yeah. And I heard you on another podcast sticking on this social media topic. You were talking about you're very aware of the content that you do consume, whether that's podcast, social
Mm,
media, and kind of what you are consuming. Now, I'd love to hear you kind of go into that about like, what are you focused on with the content that you are consuming? Like, what are you trying to maybe stay clear from? What
mm.
moments are you like, maybe I can dive a little deeper into some comedy, a little bit of something
Or,
else? When do I want to dive into maybe the mental performance sphere a little bit more than I usually do? Like, because I'm sure
yeah,
you probably need a break from that as well as
certainly.
anyone. And then how would you maybe, work with an athlete on something similar as that? Because I feel like, especially in today's age, again, I'm guilty of it as well. You can get sucked into all types of different content and things that are just
Oh,
nonsense
yeah.
that at the end of the day, you look at your phone and you're like, man, I really just watched these videos for 30 minutes and gained nothing out of
Yep.
it. Like, how do you kind of set that, I guess, limitation for yourself? And what are like your, I don't know, core components of how you utilize that?
Yeah, yeah, really, really, really good question. I'll have to caveat by saying this is 1,000,000% a work in progress.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. I mean, it's like sometimes I'll be like, how was that really 45 minutes? Like
Yeah.
how was that possible? So yes, that happens. As far as setting, I'm more of the style of like, I'll set guardrails, right? So guardrails like give me room to move around. They give me some flexibility. They still let me be in control, but I also have boundaries in a sense. That's a good question. I mean, the easiest way that I do it is I just have like, let's take Instagram, for example. I have two different profiles. And on one, it is my golf and it is mental performance. And I don't, bring anything into that mix that is not relevant to that. On my personal, I don't bring in any golf, frankly. I keep that all out and I just bring in my friends and art and music and those other things that I'm interested in too. So I can shift back and forth and have a clear kind of separation in a sense. Outside of this, with other forms of media, and my wife doesn't love this part about me, but like I'm not big into shows. I'm not big in like movies. So what I'm the type of guy, like when I'm sick, I'll just watch comedies because I believe I'm going to laugh and laughing is going to make me feel better. And boom, I'm going to be, nervous system better placed, etc. So I have kind of like general rules of thumbs on those. And then outside of that, the journey I'm in now it's just building awareness. So recognizing when I'm on swipe like 10 rather than when I'm on swipe like 1,000 of,
Right.
do I really want to be doing this right now? And sometimes the answer is yes. Yeah, this is my time to chill and kick it, and I'm going to do this. And other times it's no, I have my laptop in my hand, my lap. I'm supposed to be working on something else. I'm going to pivot back to that. So trying to create that space to recognize, to then, choose which route do I go. That's to me, I think, the most valuable skill with it all.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm definitely guilty of swiping way longer than I should. And I
Hurt.
I definitely know that it's something that's really important. And I think, youth athletes probably face that more than,
Mm,
we ever did as younger
yeah.
athletes. Now, I'd love to hear too from your perspective, and then we'll hop right into our Fast Five segment. But the next question I have for you is like when you're working with these youth athletes, I think a lot of people that have come on here have said, social media is a brilliant side and it has like a terrible side, obviously,
Yeah,
and I think a lot of the content that you're posting, I think if an athlete came across would have an educational benefit from it or be introduced to you and maybe be like, hey, this is someone I want to work with and learn from. But
sure.
then there's also the part of social media where, kids are kind of scrolling for a long time, right? Like when you're working with an athlete, one, have you seen athletes kind of get sucked into this social media craze of maybe comparing to other people or saying, hey,
Mm,
this athlete has this going on, this athlete has this going on, and how do you kind of
yeah,
address that? And like how do you, I guess, maybe help an athlete set guardrails on like, okay, you
yeah,
can be on social media because everyone has it. There is a benefit. You could kind of keep up with what your friends are doing, but
sure.
you also can't get sucked into this. Hey, Johnny's committed to this school and he's doing X, Y, and Z, and
Right,
it looks great and he looks really
right.
cool doing it. Like, how do you kind of work with athletes on that specific portion? Has everything to do with the mental side of the game as well.
Absolutely, right? I mean, all those thoughts and all those questions and comparisons come with us onto the court or the course or whatever the heck it may be and make a difference for sure. It's a good question. Typically with I feel this way about a lot of things in life and I saw this a lot with, previous clients that I've worked with where anything that's good, make sure I'm not lying as I say this. Anything that's good is good up until a certain point until it's not, right? And even remarkable skill sets, discipline. Let's take this for example. Like I've met people who is like they are remarkably disciplined, and that has served them very, very well. But they've also taken that good thing and used it so much that it now turns into a negative thing, right? It hurts relationships or it takes them away from, their health or whatever it is. So what I'll typically try to do with folks, and it would apply in this situation too, is like we know both sides exist. Let's understand where the line's at. Like let's just talk about the line. Like where is that boundary? And let's describe it. How do you know when you're there? What are the behaviors? When I start hearing myself talk about Johnny and how I can't believe Johnny's got that offer and I don't have that offer, that's a cue that okay, I'm maybe dipping a little too far into this. I want to take a step back. If we can create that, if there's enough maturity there with a younger athlete to, have that conversation, I think that makes a lot of sense. Outside of that, that's a really good question. I try to drop my hints, but at the end of the day, I also just, let them take their path to some degree, understand they're a kid. And, it might take some time to learn some of these larger lessons as well. I'll be frank, and I won't get fully on my soapbox with this, but where I have found the most internal struggle with is not with the with athletes, but it's with parents of youth athletes and parents' obsession with social media for their kid, which is
Right.
fantastic. And I don't have children, so I'm sure my perspective will be different once I do. And they're
Of
an
course.
athlete. I'll,
Of course.
I'll think they're the best thing ever. But that's where I've seen there be more issues and more in the sense than anything that I think it starts to create a lot of pressure for the kid, right? Of, oh God,
Yeah.
now I know,
Yeah. Yeah.
mom and dad have this Instagram for my sports page and they always post updates. And what if I
Right.
don't play well? They don't have their, I think that creates a little too much involvement.
Yeah.
So that's where I like to have more of the conversations.
Yeah, I'd love to actually jump into that very quickly about just like parents and you maybe working with parents. So you might
Mm,
not necessarily have parents as clients, but just speaking in the sense of like obviously a lot of your athletes have their parents and you've probably seen different levels of involvement, but like how important is it for I guess parents to also embody the same mental performance aspects as like your athletes are because I've had a lot of these conversations. I coached youth travel baseball for years. And man, some of the stories are ridiculous from what you hear. Like just parents who, again, one, they see their kid as the best athlete that's ever existed. They're the next Mike Trout, or you have the opposite side where they ground out and it's like, why are you even playing this? Why are we even paying all this money? And it's like, oh,
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
definitely a dark side. And, when you come across parents that just get it and understand it and are there for their kids and support, it's like a beautiful thing. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, like, how important is it for the parents to be on board with this mental performance journey as much as the kids?
Yeah, no, massively, right? I think through a variety of examples, I'm thinking of this one young man that I've worked with in the past, and his father, who I've built a decent relationship with, he is an endurance athlete himself and has done some really remarkable things in the swimming world. And his dad demonstrates a lot of those qualities. And as I worked with the young man, his son, before I knew him too well, I was like, man, this young man is on it. Like, how does he know all of this already and think in this way? Well, what do you know? The influence is coming from mom and dad makes a huge difference. So the opposite side of that is certainly true as well. Considering the fact that I typically, most of my clients, we talk every other week, right? For about 15 minutes or so. That means I spend 2 hours out of, not that good at math, but 2 weeks worth of hours
Yeah, right.
with them, sharing messages. Mom and dad spend almost every single day. So, they are reinforcing and they are modeling at such a larger degree. So if I can get them bought in, if I can get them to understand the perspective, or at least, the broad brushstrokes of what we're working on and what we're talking with, hey, help us support in these ways. I think that's always fantastic, right? More people rowing in the same direction. We're going to get there with a little more efficiency for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. And definitely being around the youth sports game, I definitely think it's needed more and more because it's only getting crazier. Like you said, on social media, you see parents now have social media accounts for their kids when they're, I see it all the time with more in the baseball field, but like 12-year-old athletes, their parents have, their whole page is a highlight reel of their kids. And again, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're saying, what kind of pressure does that put on them without even acknowledging it, right? And it might be coming from a place of, I'm proud of my
Yeah.
son for doing these things and it's
Totally.
great, but there sometimes could be more harm in that, which is crazy, but that's the world we live in
Yeah.
now.
Every good thing has a boundary, right? I mean, this
Yes.
this is it. Like, yes, pride is fantastic until now it creates an expectation, and now it's a weight on top of this 12-year-old. What cracks me up is when I see like kids that age and they're like mic'd up. Like this is this is
Yeah.
this is not that serious.
Yeah.
It's really not. But nonetheless, yes, it gives us good opportunity to keep preaching our message.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. All right, Trevor, let's jump right into our Fast Five segment. So, as I told you before, 5 semi rapid fire questions about mental performance in sports, and I'll load them up and we'll be ready to go.
Okay, let's do it.
Awesome. Cool. All right. First question. What part of your identity did sports help you discover?
A calmness. I had a high school basketball coach who used to say that I was the calm in the storm,
Yeah.
and I don't know why. I really like that. It stuck, and now I have leaned into that heavily, not just in
Yeah.
my work, but just in like relationships and work settings and wherever it may be. When a catastrophe or when something kind of goes a little wonky, I feel comfortable with kind of being stable, calm, and
Yeah.
being grounded in a moment like that.
Now, I normally don't ask questions in this segment, but my
Heard.
question for you, because I something really interesting that you said, he called you that, like you're the calm in the storm.
Yeah.
Do you think him calling you that then made you embody that even more moving forward? Did that become almost your identity as an athlete, if that makes sense? I've heard this is a stupid example. Bert Kreischer, the comedian, he was talking about his relationship with his dad when he was younger. And he's like, I was 10 years old and I came up in the bottom of the last inning. And his dad came up to him and said, how are you feeling? And he's like, nervous. He's like, why? He's like, buddy, you always come up in the clutch. This is when you perform your best. And he's like, I was 10 years old. I've never had a moment where I was under pressure. And then he said, now, any moment that he had in sports or in comedy or anything, when his back's against the wall, he's like, this is where I thrive. So
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
always think that's interesting. And I'd love to hear maybe from your perspective. You might not even have thought about it, or maybe it carries no weight, but do you think that did impact kind of your identity as an athlete moving forward?
Yeah, I would say larger than an athlete. I would say that's impacted my identity as like a human,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and for everybody, I'm sure it's a little bit different, but at that time in life, like I was shy, awkward. I
Yeah.
didn't I apologize for everything. Not super confident, frankly, at all. And then to have somebody who I definitely respected is like, here's the varsity coach telling me this as like a freshman. It's like, oh hell yeah, if he sees that in me, then like I guess I should see that
Yeah.
in me.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah, why not? I'll wear that. And you just start to believe it. And then, and then it actually happens, right? And sometime you're like, oh, I didn't get too startled there. Like that, I was able to kind of be calm in that moment. It's like, I guess that was true. And then, it's a snowball to some degree. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely formative.
No, that's really cool. I love to hear that. All right. Question number 2. Looking back, what moment felt like the end for you, but ended up just being a new beginning?
Definitely quitting in college. Absolutely. I thought my life was done for. I was like, what the heck else am I going to do? But with a few weeks time, I realized, oh, wait a minute. This is just opening a door to something that I frankly am probably even more passionate about than the sport itself.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Question number 3. When everything around you is chaotic, what is one habit that brings you back to center?
I have a joking one but serious, and I have a more serious one. Cleaning, frankly.
Yeah.
When life
Okay.
is chaotic and I'm out of control, I will organize like no other. I will do some dishes and it just gives me that sense of control, right? I have autonomy in a moment again. I can, put order back to a space. And while it hasn't changed the real external, at least has changed my immediate. And that, gives me enough room to breathe. That would be the second one. The more realistic one is to breathe. Just learning to take deep breaths. And I've gotten very interested in it from a heart rate variability side of things and understanding it and working with wearables. But many people swear by it. I'm just part of that committee. It's like, yeah, learning to breathe is a game changer when shit hits the fan.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I love the cleaning aspect too. I feel like I'm in a similar boat with that. I feel like once you clean your area in which you feel chaotic, you're like, you know what? We can start fresh now. We can
Yeah,
get this thing going. We're good. So
absolutely true.
I appreciate that. Question number 4. What belief about yourself did you have to unlearn in order to grow as an athlete or a person?
A good question. Belief about myself I had to unlearn. This is kind of okay. Okay. Wow, these are some great questions. It would have to be I don't know if I have the perfect words for this, but it's this idea that my ideas actually have value. My ideas actually, can contribute. They can make a difference. Maybe actually they're decent. I think again, growing up through middle school, high school, even parts of college for sure. Confidence for me personally was very low. Again, I not like to talk, approach people, yada yada, and that would just really mean I wouldn't contribute in a lot of situations. I would have an idea, I'd have a response, but I wouldn't say it just due to shyness or fear of judgment or whatever it is. And as I've gotten older, I've realized, wait a minute, that's not the truth at all. Like, let go of that. That's okay. Toss your ideas out there, and what do you know? The more I do, the better things tend to play out. So now trusting that with more confidence for sure.
I love that. And then last question, number 5. What does success feel like to you now, and how has that changed since you were an athlete?
This is a good question as well. So I have a piece of paper here on my wall in front of me, and I was actually working on this recently, asking myself very much to this question's point, like kind of what's it all about without getting like too existential.
Yeah.
And for myself, it's really, I've been coming back to this idea about like living a meaningful life. And success to me is living a meaningful life. And I've broken that down into, what that looks like in my day to day. But it's really the idea of like when I put my head on the pillow at the end of the day, and not to get morbid, but like when I put my head down on the pillow for like the final time, I want to feel content, like, wow, that was a great run. Sad to let it go, but I'm excited for what's next. And, let's kind of roll with it from there. That is a good kind of definition of it. Success for me, at least at this point. It'll change,
Yeah.
I'm sure, but
Yeah.
that's where we're
Of
at
course.
now.
No, I love that. That's awesome. Trevor, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking time to share your journey and go over some awesome conversations that we had today. I really do appreciate you taking the time and having this chat. I think it was awesome. I think there were a lot of great takeaways. Maybe drop your social medias as well. So anyone listening that wants to kind of catch you on Instagram, catch you on any social media can do so. But really appreciate you coming on. It was awesome to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, Instagram is the main one I function from. That's just at Mindset Coach Trev. Pretty straightforward. That's my website as well, mindsetcoachtrev.com. And yeah, reach out. Let's chat. I'm always down to riff with folks. So thank you again. Appreciate it, Brandon.
No, thank you.